In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus repletuorum cora fidelium, et tui amoris ignei signem accende, emite spiritum tuum equeabuntur. Oremus Deus cora fidelium, Sancti Spiritus illustratione docovisti, da nobis in iodem spiritu recta sapere, et eius per consolatione gaudere, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Sede sapientiae,
Ora pro
in
nobis.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right. So we're talking about the necessity of moral necessity of revelation. All right, so we're on page 631. In the Middle Ages, with the exception of certain pantheists and Averroists, philosophy in the schools was rightly subordinated to the truths of the faith and was thus preserved from error. So philosophy was always used as a tool of theology. In modern thinkers who not only distinguish philosophy from faith, but going further, separated them, we find the immediate appearance of sensualism and materialism in the British empiricists, or the immoderate idealism of Descartes, along with many errors leading to voluntarism and to subjectivism. If you look at the footnote, according to Descartes, the necessity of the principle of contradiction depends on the divine freedom. In other words, that God could possibly annul the principle of contradiction. So there are many and also the second one, the utterly first principle, according to Descartes, is I think, therefore I am. However, the truth of this would not remain if we rejected the absolute truth of the principle of contradiction. So he was wrong. There are many errors even in Leibniz's writings, especially psychological determinism. You see that you don't have free will, that you are sort of a robot of your own, of factors around you, and your circumstances and your emotions and whatnot. There are many errors even, both in God and in us. Finally, with Kant, we arrive at agnosticism, and with Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel at pantheistic evolutionism. Today, countless philosophers are positivists. Hence, that's a form of Kantianism. Hence, they deny the necessity of the principles of reason, God's knowability, and the foundation of moral obligation, and they acknowledge only an obligation that is externally imposed by society for preserving what is useful for life in common. Thus, a practical materialism grows in strength, holding that authority is nothing else than the sum of the number and forces of matter. See, in other words, that whoever has the biggest stick or the most guns. All of this provides us with a confirmation concerning the moral necessity of the revelation of the natural truths of religion. Hence, the Church, who is the guardian of the deposit of revelation, is also called the guardian of reason, as is clear in Pius X's encyclical Pascendi, which defends the powers of reason against agnosticism. So that's something you must read, is that encyclical. We should have a course on reading the encyclicals that date from maybe even the 18th century right up till 1958. And then he says in number 2 that the history of peoples and religions also demand point to a moral necessity for revelation. So you had polytheism, for example, idolatry, The immortality of the soul was denied by many. Finally, regarding morals, enemies and slaves were often treated with cruelty. Fornication was not counted among vices, and the sin against nature was rather common, as is testified by Cicero, Plutarch, Sallust, and Epictetus. It was common among the Romans, and the Greeks. Sins against nature means sodomy. All of whose testimony is confirmed by the apostle himself, who said, "For their women have changed the natural use into that use which is against nature, and in like manner the men also, leaving the natural use of women, have burned in their lusts one towards another, being filled with all iniquity, malice, fornication, avarice, wickedness, full of envy, murder, contention, deceit, malignity, whisperers." All right, that's Romans chapter 1. All right, so that is obviously very applicable to today. And he says that even the most illustrious philosophers were not strong enough to lead the people to true worship of God and the practice of natural virtues. So they remained philosophers. They were not people that could draw the whole population to virtue. So there's a moral necessity for the revelation of the truth of religion. Right? That's the point of that. So revelation of supernatural mysteries is hypothetically but strictly necessary. So here we're saying that you cannot know things that are strictly speaking supernatural, such as the Blessed Trinity, without revelation. And I don't think we need to read all of that because that's quite clear. In other words, how are you going to know it otherwise? You can't reason to it. That's against the semi-rationalists. All right. And the paragraph 4, I don't think we need to read that. The point of it is that, just what it says, that it is befitting that God would order mankind to a supernatural end. In other words, it's obviously not necessary that he did, but it's befitting, it's suitable that he did. Conveniens in Latin. The argument is that it is befitting to the highest good, namely God, that he would communicate himself to creatures according to what is most intimate in himself. Now, what is most intimate to God is his divine nature, precisely qua divine. Qua means as divine. Therefore, it is befitting to God that he would communicate to us a participation in his divine nature. So the minor premise is the key there. On the next page, he talks about that. The minor is clear indeed. Already in acting as the author of nature, God communicates to his creature some analogical participation of his perfections, namely to exist, to live, to understand. Those are all things ultimately proper to God. Inanimate bodies are analogically related to God inasmuch as they are beings, plants and animals inasmuch as they are living, and men inasmuch as they are intelligent. However, no creature naturally has a participation in the deity, that is, the divine nature, precisely inasmuch as it is divine. Hence, in order for God to communicate himself according to what is most intimately his, he must offer us a participation in his divine nature, precisely inasmuch as he is divine. So, in other words, he's saying every creature in some way is a reflection of God's nature, but it is not a participation in his intimate nature. And since we are capable of it because we have an intellect, it is suitable that he raise us to the supernatural order. That's essentially it. Then he talks about the desire to see God. In number 2 there, the elevation required for our natural, conditional, inefficacious desire to see God. See, it's natural because we know that God exists from reason. It's conditional in the sense that if God should raise us to it, and inefficacious, that means an inefficacious desire is one that is a desire that you cannot fulfill. I would like to go to the moon. I don't, but those, some kid said that, or some adult too, I mean, your possibility of going to the moon it's virtually impossible, right? So, or I like to go to Jupiter, and that's known as an inefficacious desire. That is, if it were possible, I would do it. See, but it's impossible, at least morally impossible. So that's an inefficacious desire. An efficacious desire is one that is able to be, I would like something to eat. That's an efficacious desire. So now, without our elevation to the supernatural end, our natural, conditional, inefficacious desire to see God as he is in himself cannot be satisfied. So that is the church's teaching, is that there is an inefficacious desire to see God. That if I could, that would be nice to see him. But without a supernatural elevation, you can't. All right. So he goes through the argument for that, but I think it's quite clear. If you see St. Thomas's quote there, in nature itself there is a kind of beginning of the very good that is proportioned to nature, whence it is also necessary that in order for man to be ordered to the good of eternal life, there must be a kind of beginning of it in him to whom it is promised. And this beginning exists through faith, which holds from an infused light those things that naturally exceed our knowledge. Well, faith is the foundation of the entire spiritual life. So, then there's a big bit of a controversy here, whether the state of pure nature, in the state of pure nature, the revelation of the full array of natural truths of religion would have been morally necessary. And you can read that on your own, because it's a speculation. There's some controversy about it. All right, so we can skip all that. So we go to section 4 on the credibility of the mysteries of the faith and knowability of the fact of revelation. So here we're going to talk about Article 1, the Catholic notion of faith and the heterodox notions of it. That's important. Theological explanation of the Catholic notion of faith. Article 3, how revelation must be known precisely as the formal motive of infused faith. That's all very important. Article 1, the nature of rational credibility, and the necessity of certain rational credibility, at least with moral certitude, on the office of the judgment of credibility in the genesis of the act of faith, resolution of objections. So what we're going to talk about is, in that part, chapter 15, is the credibility that is necessary for let's say, a rational act of faith. See, Søren Kierkegaard, who was a Danish Lutheran minister, he said faith is just a blind jump. See, and for many Protestants, that's what it is. In order for you to make an act of faith, and this is really the theme of all of apologetics, is that you must have motives of credibility shown to you. that it is reasonable to believe. And that doesn't mean that you accept the truths of the faith on reason, but you believe because it is reasonable to make an act of faith. And that's what you have to show somebody in order to convert them. So this gets really into the meat of De Revelatione. So I'll read this on page 650. We're almost done with it. Having already treated of the notion of revelation as well as its possibility and befittingness, following the logical order of our inquiry as well as the order followed by the First Vatican Council, we now must treat the question of the possibility of the acceptance of this revelation by believers through faith. We already have said that the prophet himself, who immediately receives revelation from God, must, under the prophetic light, have certitude concerning the very fact of revelation, so that he might infallibly propose the divine doctrine to men as something revealed by God. See, so there has to be not only the revelation made to the prophet, but also a prophetic light whereby he knows it's from God. Otherwise, he cannot distinguish it from his imagination. All right, so the question now facing us is the following: how can the mysteries of faith be rationally credible for believers who accept revelation, though not immediately from God? See, so you accept revelation from somebody that has told you. So you're raised a Catholic, so your parents and the teachers in your school tell you what revelation is. So you don't have an experience from God of receiving revelation. Indeed, if the mysteries of faith cannot be rationally credible for the faithful, their faith would be nothing but flippant credulity. So credulity means, sometimes credulity has a good sense and other times it has a bad sense. But in the bad sense, it means to believe something without sufficient foundation. If a seminarian told me the angel Gabriel appeared to me last night, all right, well, prove it. There's some of these apparitions and things like that, where the more unusual or bizarre a thing is, the more it demands proof. See, if somebody says there's been an accident out on the road, well, they say, well, maybe, that doesn't demand a lot of proof. But if somebody says the angel Gabriel came to me last night, that demands a lot of proof if I'm going to believe that. So credulity would be to believe something without sufficient credibility. That's the bad sense of credulity. Sometimes it's used as just, especially in the negative, someone is incredulous, meaning or lacks credulity in the sense that they lack a disposition to faith. See, it depends on the context of it, but normally credulity in English has a negative context. So, for prudence dictates that nothing is to be believed unless it is credible. He who believes quickly, that is rationally, is flippant of heart, as is said in the book of Sirach, which is Sirach is Ecclesiasticus. That's what the Protestants call it, and that's what the Novus Ordo calls it. It's Ecclesiasticus. All right. Now, in this question concerning the rational credibility of the mysteries of faith, just as in the preceding questions, we find ourselves in opposition to rationalists, and in particular liberal Protestants. Indeed, rationalists simply deny that the mysteries of the Christian faith are rationally credible. See, they won't even listen. It's not possible. Whereas Protestants, especially liberal Protestants, do not understand the rational credibility of Christianity in the same way that as does the Catholic Church. Neither of them have the same notion of credibility, and hence neither have the same proof of credibility, given that they differ concerning the very notion of faith, for the notion of credibility ultimately depends on one's notion of faith. According to the Catholic Church, divine faith is founded on the authority of God who reveals, whereas by contrast, Protestants, especially liberal Protestants, hold that religious faith is nothing other than religious experience proceeding from religious sentiment. That's important when you're talking to a Protestant. That faith for them is this some sort of experience that they feel they have of God. They feel it. That's why they have these meetings where they stir people up, and they're all in a frenzy and they're having a religious experience of God. That's faith for them. It's faith for the modernists too. The Catholic notion of faith is assent of the intellect to truths revealed by God and proposed as such by the Catholic Church. That's the definition of faith for the Catholics. So it's a completely cold thing. It's as cold as the intellect itself. I say that means it's not some emotional thing. It's not an experience. It is simply somebody has told you something and you believe it. So you have acts of faith all during the day, natural faith. The weather. You look for the weather. It's going to rain today. Well, if somebody's telling you that it might, they might be all wrong. But there's reasons to believe, these. It's usually right, and they've done their research, and or what you read on the news. You don't see those things. You don't see that there's a plane crash someplace or that a house burned down or anything like that. You just believe it. You make acts of faith the whole day. You don't realize it. There's very few things that you actually experience for yourself. What you eat, what comes out from the kitchen, you make an act of faith that it's not poison and it won't kill you. It's true. It's true. Maybe Dorothy wants to knock off all the seminarians, Don't tell her that. She'll think that that's what you think, that she wants to poison you. But no, it's true. Everything you put to your mouth, you have an act of faith that it's okay. And what you drink and so forth, and have they poisoned the wells? It could be anything. And that's where you get paranoia. In other words, people who have excessive fear that somebody's trying to harm them. That's paranoia. See, but it's not rational. So that's what we call natural faith, and it happens. Courts of law, people are condemned to death based on natural faith. People come in, testify, this is the one that shot that person, et cetera, et cetera. You believe these witnesses, and then you say somebody's got to die in order to make up for that. So, that's act of faith. So, but supernatural faith is based on God revealing and church proposing. That's the proposition of the church is a conditio sine qua non, because otherwise we would not know what in fact God reveals. All right. Otherwise you have the chaos of Protestantism. So hence they are radically opposed to each other regarding the notion of credibility. However, there cannot be disagreement among Catholic theologians regarding the notion of credibility and how it is proven, for this has been explicitly determined by the magisterium. However, not all theologians agree concerning the essential supernaturality of faith, and hence concerning the relation of faith to rational credibility. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. This must be briefly discussed after the manner of a status questionis, the state of the question, so that the true difficulty be resolved and may be clearer for us. The difficulty of this question is expressed as follows in the objection raised by the rationalist Victor Cousin in the first chapter of his Introduction à l'histoire de la philosophie. Philosophy is the light of all lights, the authority of all authorities. Those who wish to impose an alien authority upon philosophy and upon thought do not realize that only one of two things is possible. Either thought does not understand this authority, and thus it is as though such authority didn't really exist, or it does understand it, forming an idea of it and accepting it on this score, thus taking itself as the ultimate measure, rule, and authority. That's his objection. See that either you don't understand the authority, or you consent to the authority, but that is something that you decide to do. In other words, that which absolutely stands above all other forms of knowledge neither can nor should be subject to another form of knowledge. Now, philosophy stands absolutely above all other forms of knowledge, even above faith, according to these people. In fact, when a Christian believes, surely does he not use his reason as a measure, rule, and ultimate and supreme authority in the act of faith? That's his point. Indeed, if the Christian believes the mysteries of the faith because God revealed them, he believes that God revealed such mysteries precisely because of the motives of credibility. Hence, the first motive of faith is found in the motives of credibility. However, it is a property of the natural power of reason to know and weigh out those motives, and it moves itself to assent to them. Therefore, it is proper to the natural power of reason to command the act of faith. Therefore, reason and hence philosophy truly is the measure. See, this is all, he's making the objection here. This is not truth, this is the objection. All right, truly is the measure as well as the ultimate supreme authority of all things to be known. And when the Christian believes, so he's saying that you don't believe except if you find it credible, but you don't find it credible except for rational causes. That's the objection. All of this summarizes Father Lepide's own exposition of Father Victor Cousin's objection, which Lepide, who was a Dominican, himself already admirably resolved in accord with St. Thomas's thought on these matters. As regards to the resolution of this difficulty, the various theological schools do not agree with each other at all. According to Scotus Molina, that means you know this is wrong when you see those two names together, and many modern thinkers, theological faith is not essentially supernatural on account of its formal motive. But according to them, this formal motive is knowable by reason alone. See, so they say the virtue of faith is not essentially a supernatural virtue. For on the basis of miracles, anyone can know by reason alone that the mysteries of faith are revealed by God and can believe them naturally, just as the demons believe. See, so the devils believe things that are revealed based on a natural proof. However, in order to have theological faith, there must be an added supernatural modality. See, that's just like probably learned in maybe, have you taken ascetical and mystical theology? Taking it now. You'll learn that there are infused supernatural virtues. And then others, the natural virtues, are raised. In other words, a secundum modum, to a modality of supernaturality. But they're natural virtues that are, that have supernatural chocolate sauce on them, so to speak. All right. So the Molina is saying that that's the same thing for supernatural faith. That it's just natural faith that is uplifted, you might say. However, in order to have theological faith, there must be added a supernatural modality. Thus, according to them, theological faith is only modally supernatural, resting upon a naturally knowable formal motive. See, that's the Jesuit theology. It's always humanizing. It has this tendency to humanize. If you study it a lot, to bring things down, I'd say. In contrast, the Thomas and Suarez, now that's an unusual combination, because Suarez is almost always wrong. Almost, not, Molina is always wrong. Scotus is always wrong, except for the Immaculate Conception. That's the one time he was right. And everything else he's wrong. But Suarez, his idea was to reconcile St. Thomas and Scotus. Which was not possible, but he tried it, and so he was a very intelligent man and a very pious man. So not everything that he said was wrong. And he said many very edifying things and very true things. But in controversies, he tends to run against the Thomists. He does. Tends to, but not always. So Suarez say that merely preserving the rationality of the obedience of faith is not enough. Beyond this, faith's essential supernaturality must be preserved, a supernatural certitude that cannot be formally resolved into prerequisite inferior rational certitude coming from motives of credibility. So they're defending the absolute supernaturality of the act of faith. Hence, according to them, the formal motive of faith is essentially supernatural and cannot be known formally as such by reason alone. See, so the formal motive, what makes you believe, is a supernatural infused virtue. There's something infused into your intellect by God that makes you believe. It is not merely something that you believe on rational credibility that is sort of elevated. See, the only thing that you need is rational credibility, but there's a point where you make an act of faith, and that is under the influence of God. That's what you're going to learn with regard to faith. Yes?
Your Excellency, is infused supernatural faith given by God before baptism or only after baptism?
It is given in baptism, but you have to have at least what is known as a disposition to it in order to be baptized. In other words, that you accept the truths of the Catholic faith in that sense, But the infused virtue comes with the baptism. Yes.
So is it true to say then, Your Excellency, that before baptism someone only has natural faith and not supernatural faith?
Unless he has baptism of desire already. See, some people go justified already to their baptisms. Some people do. And that's entirely possible. They might already have received a grace of supernatural faith. See, but you receive it as a baby. You receive the virtues of the three theological, the whole supernatural organism, as a baby, and that will continue unless you somehow deny the faith. In other words, you have all of the ability to accept revelation by supernatural faith. But if you grow up and become an atheist or something like that, which many do, then of course you lose it, and you could regain it by recanting your atheism. See, like for example, a catechumen easily could achieve supernatural faith before baptism. No.
I was just going to ask if, in that case, he would also have supernatural hope and charity, but I'm sure the answer is yes.
Yes, you cannot achieve justification without getting the whole deal. That's kind of a crummy way to put it. But in other words, you can't be sort of half justified. As justification, you go from the state of either original sin or mortal sin or both to the state of sanctifying grace. The state of sanctifying grace is going to include all of those things. There's no degree in it or anything like that. Like I got half of it today or something like that.
I guess with the exception, they do say if you're in the state of sanctifying grace and you lose the state of sanctifying grace, you lose hope and charity but retain faith.
That's true. Yes, that's true. You retain faith, but it's what they call dead faith. In other words, faith by its very nature, something like a seed that by its very nature is going to produce hope and charity by its very nature. If you commit a mortal sin, it's going to reduce it to like a sterile seed. It's there, but it cannot produce hope and charity. Because if you see something that is desirable, that's faith. And so that produces supernatural hope and supernatural charity because you love it. You couldn't have the hope unless you see that it's a good thing. You see, so there's the love of God, and then there's the hope of achieving Him. See, that flows naturally, you might say, from faith, because you're looking at something that is intrinsically desirable. You see, it's good. You see, so that's faith is generative, you might say, of the other two virtues, but it can remain without it. Yes, but you cannot achieve justification without getting supernatural faith, hope, and charity. You can't just get faith without hope and charity. Let's see. Is that no? Yes, you got it. Have you done De Grazia?
Not yet.
Yeah, let's see that. So much to do. So, hence, therefore, for the Thomists, the essential supernaturality of faith must be reconciled with the rational obedience owed to it. See, and so, in other words, where does reason end? Where does faith take over? See, so we're going to say that in order to make an act of faith, you need motives of credibility, that it is reasonable to believe. That's going to be the answer to that. And so, yes, reason is involved in the act of credibility, but it's not involved in the act of faith. So, no. All right. So the division of the question concerning credibility. This division is taken from the nominal definition of credibility, which must serve as our starting point. Now, the word credible signifies that which can be believed, just as scientifically knowable, scibile in Latin, is that which can be known scientifically, and the probable or opinable, in other words, where you might achieve an opinion about a hypothesis about something, that which can be the object of opinion. So opinion, you remember the definition of opinion is to adhere to A, but with the fear that B may be true, its opposite. That's an opinion. Now the term theological opinion is often misused. Well, that's your signal. Is often misused to mean a sententia theologica. In other words, a sententia is a firm position, it's certitude, you see, and it does not fear its opposite. See, so a sententia certa, or you could have, sometimes you get up with sententia probabilis, depending on, but the opinio by its very nature is fears its opposite may be true. See, so sententia, even a probable opinion is not a probable sententia, is just saying that there probable does not mean probable in the common sense. It means that there are strong reasons to assert this. So that's a probable opinion. That means you can prove this with strong reason. But an opinion is, there are arguments in favor of this, but there's arguments against it. That's an opinion. So, but that term theological opinion is thrown around to mean a lot of things, and it's not precise. So just so you know that. So that's why opinionism with regard to the Sede Vacantis position is you're fearing that the opposite may be true. I would say that in that case, if you're an opinionist, you would have to side. There's a principle in, first of all, submission to the Roman Pontiff is necessary for salvation, and you cannot use probabilism, which causes a theological opinion with regard to things that pertain to salvation. See, so you have to have at least a moral certitude about whether he is or is not the Pope. So you can't just remain in a fog of opinion, because your salvation depends on your obedience to him. So you have to resolve that somehow. So it has to be resolved either to yes or no. And I would say in that, the fact that he's elected and commonly accepted as Pope, that would, because of the principle that in dubio stat pro superiore, I don't know if you've done that in moral theology, but in doubt, the presumption stands for the authority. In other words, that if he appears to be the authority, that you would give him the benefit of that doubt. So it would seem to me that you would do that if you're only in opinion about it, or if they have a certain doubt about it. Doubt is where you hold neither one or the other. It's just you're torn between the two. But opinion is where you lean toward one, but you're fearful that the other may be true. So it would seem to me that would be where you would have to go with that. In other words, I have an opinion that he's not the Pope. Be like having an opinion that what's in the tabernacle is body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. It's like a doubtful sacrament. In other words, you cannot frequent a doubtful sacrament. So it would seem to me that you would have to resolve that in order to act morally, one way or the other. And that's why I think it's not a tenable position. You can't remain in that because it pertains to salvation. You can remain in doubt about, say, who's right, Molina or St. Thomas. You could remain in an opinion about that, yes. Various other controversies. But the identity of the Pope is absolutely necessary, or either he is or is not. It's absolutely necessary for the functioning of the Catholic Church. So you've got to go one way or the other on that. So, so let's see. Hence, now something is called rationally credible if it is not imprudent for one to believe it, because it is in accord with right reason. So, for example, when they told St. Thomas that a cow was flying, and he looked out the window, looked up, you see that he was credulous there, but he explained it that he would sooner believe that a cow was flying than that a monk would lie. That's what he said. Of course, they probably felt like dirt after he said that. Hence, rational credibility signifies nothing other than an aptitude of a given assertion for being rationally believable. In a word, that which is deserving of faith is called credible. So a credible witness in court, is the witness credible? If the witness comes in like that disgusting prostitute that testified against Trump, that's not a credible witness. I mean, if you have somebody that leads a dissolute life, or that's not a credible witness. So you have to have a credible witness, or somebody, for example, with regard to sacraments. A sacrament is considered to be valid, is presumed to be valid, if it is done by a person who is trained in moral theology and sacramental theology. In other words, say a ordained priest who has been through, not only that he's ordained, but he's been through training like you're going through. Okay? It is presumed to be valid. All right. If a nurse does it who is not trained, then you must. It's not presumed to be valid. It is objectively doubtful, but you must have credible witness, either the nurse herself or people who saw her do it, credible witnesses as to the validity of it. Now, many times it is done validly. Even a Jew could do it validly. So if the witnesses are not credible, if they were distracted or they didn't have their glasses on or you couldn't hear anything, because you need credible witnesses to attest to the fact that it was done correctly. So that's the general law. So that does come up because you might have preemie babies, and they're baptized by people who, the parents maybe or something, and so if ever that comes up, you should instruct the parent, because many times only the parent can go in. You should instruct the parent. That happened with Father Eldracher's sister's baby. Yeah, she had some trouble and she had a premature baby, and it was, the doctor or the hospital said to the father, stay out, stay out, stay out. He just went in and baptized the baby. So and he did it right. We made sure he did it right. And she said to her mother, I feel as though I haven't been a good mother, that I didn't have the baby correctly. And she said, you were the perfect mother because you had a baby that went to heaven. That's perfection. You can't do any better than that. That's the whole idea. It's what you do with your children. So that was a nice comment from her mother. Sometimes when women, miscarry or something goes wrong, they feel that they haven't done their job. They feel kind of bad about it. And so, but that was a beautiful response, that you were the perfect mother because you brought a child into the world and he went to heaven. So very nice. And the credible is subdivided inasmuch as something appears worthy of either human and mutable faith or divine and irrevocable faith. So human faith is mutable. I mean, you could make a mistake in a courtroom and think something was credible, and in fact it was not credible, or vice versa. See, that's human faith is mutable, but divine faith is irrevocable. That's why you have to die instead of renouncing it. From this nominal signification, it is clear that the real definition of credibility depends on the notion of faith. Hence, if there are two opposed notions of divine faith, namely one that is Catholic and the other Protestant, especially liberal Protestant, there will consequently be two opposed notions of credibility, and hence two methods of proving credibility. So, in other words, if your notion of credibility is that I've had an experience of God, that's the Protestant idea, then that's very opposed to here are the proofs of credibility, miracles and prophecies, which the church is going to say also the life of the church, etc., etc. We'll see all of those proofs of credibility, but those are two entirely different things. And this experience of God is something totally subjective. It could be your imagination. I mean, it's rare that somebody would have some sort of supernatural experience of God. That's rare. I mean, it happens in the saints. They do. St. Thomas had some sort of supernatural experience when he was saying Mass and toward the end of his life, and that's when he said he stopped writing the Summa, and he said you might as well burn it all because it doesn't even come close. That's what he said. But that's rare, it's very rare, and it's not the basis of belief for everybody, is that you have some supernatural experience or apparitions. That's extremely rare. All right, so thus from this nominal definition of credibility, it is already clear that the rational credibility of the mysteries of faith is a necessary condition for a prudent act of faith, one that is not merely blind or based on some presumed experience or emotion or something like that. Nay, if the act of divine faith must be not only prudent, but also utterly firm and irrevocable, to the point of being ready to suffer martyrdom rather than call our faith into doubt, it is already clear that firmer credibility is required for believing in an irrevocable manner by divine faith than for believing by human faith. In other words, the true notion of the rational credibility of the mysteries of faith must be determined not only according to the requirements of our reason, but also according to the requirements of faith, lest it be deceived and err in a matter of so great importance, as Pope Pius IX said in his encyclical Qui Pluribus against the followers of Georg Hermes. All right, so it has to be very clear that it is reasonable to make an act of faith in what is revealed by God. So it has the motives of credibility must be crystal clear. Not not that what you can eat today at noontime is in fact real food and not poison. You don't need to go in and look at all the ingredients. What did you do? How did you prepare this? And you don't need to do that, because you don't need such clear motives of credibility. You see, because Dorothy is a nice lady, and I don't think she would do anything to poison the seminarians. See, so that's sufficient. See? And even for example, you would need more credibility in court if someone were going to be put to death for a crime than if somebody was going to spend a year in jail. So you would need a lot of credibility, and when in doubt, you would exonerate. That's the principle. If there's sufficient doubt, there's serious doubt, not just some stupid doubt, but you would exonerate in a case like that. And that's true even of any crime. It has to be beyond reasonable doubt that somebody committed the crime. So I always wanted to be on one of those juries, because that drives the lawyers crazy, I think. I would sit there like this, just to disturb them. Because they would fear that a priest or bishop would have a great influence on the jury. So the jury is going to say, "What do you think?" So I think they would, because some of them are just idiots. Those lawyers, some of them. Usually, when you fold your arms, it's a sign of defensiveness. That you're not happy. It's usually a sign. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Subtuum praesidium confugimus sancta Dei genitrix nostris deprecationis et despicias in necessitatibus, sed a periculis cantis libera nos semper virgo gloriosa et benedicta. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen.